Right, joining us now is Shaun Woodward, former Northern Ireland Secretary and former Labour MP, to rifle through the news of those election results like tramps in a wheelie bin. Shaun, how are you doing today?
Great, thank you very much.
Now, you're an interesting one because you, of course, started your life as a Conservative, but back in 1999, crossed the floor. They're finally standing down from the Labour Party in 2015. When you look at the results coming out today, I mean, it's pretty dire for the Conservative Party, without a doubt. But even though it looks like the Labour Party are gaining big as a result of default, you look at voter turnout and you look at share of vote, and the needle's not really moving, and key seats potentially like this Tees Valley mayoral seat aren't going to Labour. Is it really a day for Sir Keir Starmer to be popping champagne corks, or are there other narratives here that he needs to focus on?
I think Keir is very wise about this. No one's going to be popping champagne corks. It's a very, very bad night and day for the Conservative Party. It's a day which undoubtedly confirms that at the next general election, the Labour Party is back in a very competitive place and may well win the general election. But nobody is taking the voters for granted or taking the result for granted. But I think what yesterday shows, if we look, for example, at the swing against the Conservative Party in the by-election seat in Blackpool, what we're seeing here is not a government in the middle of a term. This is not mid-term blues. This is on the eve of a general election. And on the eve of a general election, another by-election, a swing, one of the most historic swings against a government candidate that we've seen. We've seen in the local election results, and I suspect the Tories are on course for losing between 400 and 500 seats when it's all counted today, and many, many councils with it. I think it's curtains for the Conservative Party. And, you know, my view is at this point, the right thing for Rishi Sunak to do is to actually call the general election. It's very clear that the government has lost its mandate. It doesn't have public support. And there is a moment when actually I think if he was wise on this, he would actually see that probably calling a general election now is the best way he can save the Conservative Party, because the hemorrhaging to the Reform Party that's taking place is potentially going to be far more catastrophic for them in the autumn than it would be if a general election happened in June or July.
Well, poor old Rishi, he is stuck between a rock and a hard place. He's actually put out a statement in the last hour asking for his reaction to the apparently disastrous local election results so far. The Prime Minister said, obviously, it's disappointing to lose good, hard-working Conservative councillors, and I'm grateful to them for all of their service in local government. He went on to say that there is still lots of results to come. Can't see it's going to save his skin much. Saying that the Tees Valley mayoralty could be a very important test. So there you go. He's trying to look for some positives in all of it. Now, interestingly, you spoke about the by-election that's taken place in Blackpool and talking about that being a major swing against the government. That, of course, was a seat that was for a long time held by the Labour Party that dramatically went to the Conservative Party under Boris Johnson's storming of the so-called Red Wall back in 2019. It seems to me that the general public are sort of radically oscillating between both major parties and kind of not really liking what either of them are saying or doing, but are stuck in this mindset that there isn't any other choice, except, of course, I would say, one particular voting cohort. And I want to draw your attention to what's happened in Oldham and get your thoughts on that. Oldham, of course, historically a Labour-run council. Now no longer a Labour-run council, because where they've got a big Muslim voting bloc there, a lot of people on the doorstep saying, we don't support the Labour Party's stance on Palestine. We don't think it goes far enough. And bringing geopolitics into an election campaign that, frankly, should be about bin collection. Is this not just worrying for the Labour Party, but potentially worrying for the nature of democracy in the UK if it sort of starts sleepwalking into becoming sectarian?
Well, as somebody who was Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, I'd be very cautious of using the word sectarian in that way. And forgive me for saying that. But I think what we're looking at here is a group of people who don't like the policy that Keir Starmer has set out, which is the Labour Party's policy in relation to what's happened in Israel and Gaza. And it's regrettable that people have taken the decision they've done, but you can't please everybody. And I think that Keir took the right decision in setting out the policy that he did. And you've only got to look around the world. I mean, people will protest. And one of the strengths of our democracy is that people can protest. They can protest by not giving you their vote. And I think that's just what you have to accept. I think what we also see in all of this, Alex, though, is that the majority of the country is actually in support of Keir Starmer. The reason that Keir has got this enormous poll lead at the moment over the Conservative Party is that most of the country thinks that he is talking common sense, and most of the country think the Conservative Party has lost that middle ground. And I think that when you, at the beginning of this, talked about oscillations amongst the public, what you've got to do, and I'm old enough at 65 to remember this, in 1979, you saw a massive sea change election happen with Mrs. Thatcher being elected. When Tony Blair won in 1997, you saw the same swing, but to the other direction, and electing Tony Blair. You saw it in part in 2010, although it wasn't really like that. 2019 was an extraordinary election for Boris. The problem is the country's given up on the Conservative Party, and with that, you will see that swing too. And the thing that I think really comes out of these results today is an underlining of time for a change. What the country simply wants is this government gone. It doesn't matter who leads it. Their bigger problem, though, has been brought in at the last moment for the Conservative Party by the advent of the Reform Party, because that is clearly dividing the Conservative vote in half in many constituencies. And the consequence of that would actually be catastrophic for the Conservative Party at a general election. And I don't see how they heal it at this stage, because let's remember that by and large, most of the Reform voters, most of them, are coming from the Conservative Party. And that is going to be catastrophic in a first-past-the-post system.
I mean, it's interesting you bring that up. Indeed, the Conservative Party was suffering that sort of huge ideological schism down the middle, which has blighted them for much of their existence, actually. I mean, these sort of breaks between the right-wing and left-wing of the Conservative Party have gone back since time immemorial. But some could say the same about the Labour Party of old. It wasn't that long ago, actually, that the Labour Party itself was hugely divided with the advent of Jeremy Corbyn as leader and that sort of underbelly of the Labour Party, which is sort of fairly hard socialist left wing, gaining control of the party. Sir Keir Starmer doing a lot to expunge the party of some of those more, some might say, sort of extreme elements, but more sort of hard left elements. Have they gone, Shaun? Or if we get a Labour government, could we see them come back?
I don't think you're going to see them come back under Keir Starmer and a future Labour government. I don't think there's any prospect of that. Look, I think these things do happen in political parties. The problem for the Conservative Party, which is not what happened to the Labour Party under Jeremy Corbyn, the problem with the Conservative Party is it's about to split. And the Reform Party is a breakaway party from within the Conservative Party. Now, in the Labour Party, what of course happened when Jeremy Corbyn won is that people like me found themselves absolutely alienated. I was appalled by some of the things that were said. But at the end of the day, we decided not to split from the party, but to stay there and fight for the change. And Keir Starmer came through. What's happening inside the Conservative Party is that Rishi Sunak has lost control of his party. The party is splitting, and nobody seems to be able to bring it back together again. Now, I remember one very important lesson that Chris Patten, who was chair of the Conservative Party for John Major, taught me, which is that you should never in politics say never. Things can always come back. You know, the Labour Party under Michael Foot looked like it was going to be in the wilderness forever. Neil Kinnock and then Tony Blair brought it back. The Conservative Party, I doubt if it's dead. It's going to have a very hard time. It's very hard to see how it can come back in the short term. But I wouldn't want to put money on the fact that it won't eventually come back.
Now,
at the moment...
Carry on, Shaun. Sorry.
Yeah, I was just going to say, at the moment, I think, you've got a lot of people who are remaining disgruntled about the outcome of Brexit. That's what fundamentally fuels the Reform Party. That will pass eventually. But right now, it's sitting there inside the Conservative Party, and I have no idea how on earth do you manage it, except it's clearly going to bring Rishi Sunak down.
Now, you said never say never in politics, a very sage bit of advice there. People who might regret saying never in politics could be Ireland and indeed the EU, who said never a hard border between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland, never police on that border, never checkpoints on that border. That border must stay open. Well, they've changed their tune a little bit now, haven't they, since discovering that 80% of the people entering Ireland and trying to claim asylum there are coming from the UK. I mean, is it right, actually, that Ireland are now saying we want to send police to that border, we want to know who's coming into the country, or is it imperative, as former Northern Ireland Secretary, that that border stays completely open?
Well, it's essential that the border remains permeable between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. That's a cornerstone and a major foundation part of the peace process in Northern Ireland. Let's again remember the reason that we are in this mess, in large part with Brexit, is because of the way that Boris Johnson cut corners on all of this. And I think, again, you can see all that being unfolded in these results today, because in a sense, he ended up by trying to please everybody, pleasing nobody. On the one hand, he did not please the people who wanted to remain in Europe, and he did not please the people who wanted to leave Europe, because patently the Reform Party is based on people who have disaffected from the Conservative Party, saying this party is not doing what we wanted.
Shaun,
and then you get the consequences of this showing up in things like the issue around the border in Northern Ireland.
Shaun, thank you so much. Shaun Woodward there, former Northern Ireland Secretary and former Labour MP.